Today we're going to talk about wedding invitation wording. I'm going to show you some examples of wording that we use in our wedding invitations. So let's go ahead and dive in. Hi everyone, I'm Lainey. I'm an invitation designer and I love to teach people how to design beautiful invitations and run successful, profitable invitation businesses. I have a free 7-day invitation design crash course that you can access via a link in the description of this video. I'm going to show you the traditional etiquette, but I also want to remind you that we are throwing that out the window these days. You need to learn the etiquette in order to break it correctly. But again, it's all about what you're saying to your guests and what you want to say to your guests. And so you can use this etiquette, but you don't have to use this etiquette exactly as it is. You just need to kind of know the rules before you decide to break them in the right way. I also have a video on addressing etiquette, which is a little bit unique and different and I think more complicated. So check that out if you are addressing your wedding invitations too. So the first part of the invitations is really who is hosting and who is being honored as hosting. It doesn't literally need to be who's paying for the wedding, but in traditional sense, it really is. So traditionally, this was the bride's parents. Now you find sometimes groom's parents host, sometimes the couple hosts themselves, sometimes the couple is not heterosexual. So, there's 2 brides, 2 grooms, who's hosting. So in this case, it's really about who you want to honor with either the credit of hosting if they're paying, if that's important to them, or who you just want to honor from a traditional standpoint. So right here we have Suzanne and Donald Wilson. That is the bride's parents here. You can also just do together with their families if you want to honor that we're kind of inviting you, but our families are really important to us and they're kind of supporting us as well. If everyone's kind of pitching in together with their families is very popular. And then you also don't even really have to do that. So if you're fully hosting, if you have weird relationships with your parents, if you just aren't as interested in honoring them, then, it can be the couple's names that are getting married and you don't have to make it quite as traditional. In this case, we wrote out the mother and father's name. You can do that. You can also put Mr. and Mrs., Dr. and Mrs., Dr. and Dr., Mr. and Mr., whatever it is that you want to do. And then what they are doing is requesting the honor of your presence at the marriage of your daughter. This is somewhat formal wording. Slightly more formal would be honor with a you, in which case for the reply card, you'd also use the favor of your reply as requested. It can also say something like invite you to celebrate the wedding of their daughter, wedding of their children, if you're listing both sets of parents up here. If you have together with their families, you need to include that actual invitation below. You also can just be totally non-traditional and say, hey, Lauren and Daniel are getting married. This is the assumption that you're invited. But I do like having something on here with the invitation. I mean, when you get this in the mail, you're invited, but I think it's nice. Typically, you're inviting to the marriage of their daughter. And in that case, if we have their last name up here, you don't have to add Lauren's last name below. I did it here because it looks better and because that's what the client requested. But you could have just put like Lauren Suzanne to, in that case, you typically will skip the groom's middle name. So their daughter, Lauren Suzanne, to Brian Hamilton. And then you can do son of Lorraine and Patrick Smith, and then Donald Hamilton here. So if you put people on the same line, it suggests that they are romantically involved. So this would be his mother and stepfather, and then his father here on a separate line. If someone is deceased, you can always put the late Donald Hamilton. He's not deceased. I don't want to put that on him. Here you see we only have first names. This is a little bit risky if you have generic first names like Lauren and Daniel, but in general, most people probably only know one couple named Lauren and Daniel getting married. You can always do the full names, first names only, Casey and Michael, and then Autumn Rose. This is a good example of, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Garner. Since we already have Garner here, we just use her first and middle name, and then his first and last name there. Let's stay on this invitation because it's just so pretty. So the next thing you'll want is the date. It's traditional to spell out everything if you're doing this formally. However, you don't have to do that. You just need to make sure you have the date and time here. Here's another example where it's kind of spelled out a little bit more than this one, but still not fully spelled out. It's important to put the day, especially if you're not getting married on a Saturday. If you're getting married on a Saturday, sometimes you can count on people to look it up. But if it's on kind of a unique day, I would recommend putting this on a Friday or Thursday or whatever it is. The year is pretty important. You want to put that on there because we're sending these things and they're getting other invitations from other people. And then the time on here is equally important. This is the time that the ceremony starts. In general, your wedding invitation is an invitation to the ceremony only. And if your reception is immediately following, then you can kind of keep it all here. But if you have a reception in a different location, you'll need to have a separate card for that. One thing that you're not really seeing on this, because I just capitalized everything, is that we actually don't use much capitalization or punctuation on invitations except within a line. So we'll use a comma to separate Saturday the 7th day of August, but we will not use a comma between that line and 2021. You also are not going to capitalize anything that's not a proper noun. So we're going to capitalize Saturday, August. We're not actually going to capitalize anything of 2021, and we're not going to capitalize anything on this line either, because those are not words that need to be capitalized automatically. If you don't like the look of this, a lot of my clients don't, you could just capitalize everything and that's okay. But if you were to go lowercase here, only the S in Saturday and the A in August are going to be capitalized. And then things like the names, etc. But son of, to, request the honor of your presence, all of those things are not capitalized. Typically, we then put the venue name, and I like to kind of make that match the names a little bit, just because I think it's the other kind of important, noteworthy part of this piece. And I think it just balances out with where it is on the invitation. It looks nice to do that if you want to do a little something else in that kind of nice font. Let's see. This one I didn't really, and this one I didn't because that's kind of the vibe of this invitation. But you'll put the name of the venue and then the street address, city, and state. You don't need a zip code on here. People are just going to type in the name of the venue to their phones anyway. But you want to put the address on here just to make sure they're in the right place. And the city state will help them if they need to book travel. That will help them understand like where, in a general sense, am I going just by looking at this. They're not going to worry about 4103 East Mission Road until like a week before the wedding, but they're going to worry about Fallbrook, California when they're booking their travel. Here's another way that I listed this. It's still the same exact information, just in a slightly more modern sense. And then here's another option where I gave this a bold, but didn't fully just put it in that same font because I wanted to pull that in over here. And then as we talked about, this is just for the ceremony. So if your reception is immediately to follow in the same location, you can just put reception to follow, dinner and dancing to follow, merriment, cocktails, hors d'oeuvres, whatever it is that you're putting on here. Some people do morning weddings and they have brunch to follow. You can just throw that on here so people know that it's coming. If you have a reception that is not immediately following, like a couple hours later or in a different place or even on a different day, that happens sometimes, you'll want to include that on a separate card that is just for the reception. And then you can also include the attire here. Most people make it kind of small, and you'll just follow your traditional guidelines, which you can look up really easily. I like to just put that really small, or the reception to follow. If someone wants to add both, I encourage them to leave off the reception to follow and just put the attire, because reception to follow is generally implied. But you can add both. I don't love to do it because it just crowds the bottom here. So I like to include either one of those lines kind of off in the corner or, centered underneath everything. Just depends on how your suite looks and how you want it to feel. And whatever your attire is, I would pay attention to matching that a little bit with the wording. So if you're going to do semi-formal attire, it makes sense to spell things out a little bit more. It makes sense to follow a little bit more of that traditional wording. If you have formal attire, then you definitely want to follow more traditional wording. That's not to say that you have to have like the bride's parents listed first, but it is to say that you want to, instead of like inviting you to celebrate their wedding, it's request the honor of your presence at their wedding, because that is going to match up with what the client's going to expect. So one thing about etiquette is that the words we use tell the guests what to expect from our wedding. And with your invitations, this is the only thing they're seeing about your wedding before. You're invested in this every day, making decisions and knowing what it's going to look like, but your guests are not seeing that. So you want what they receive in the mail to match up with the expectation of what they're going to expect on the day of the wedding. So if you got this invitation that's a little bit more casual, and then you showed up to a super formal white tie wedding, it might be a little confusing. Or this one has a really kind of playful vibe. It's got some formal wedding, but if you got this invitation in the mail and then you showed up and it was like a beach wedding, you'd be so confused. So you can do this both with the imagery and design on your wedding, but also with the wording. You're giving your guests something to expect, and you want to make sure that that is accurate to what they're going to actually find at the wedding. So again, sometimes I like to say etiquette schmetiquette. You do not have to put the bride's family first. You don't have to put the bride first on the invitation. You might have 2 brides, in which case, I don't know, perform a joust, do a thumb word, decide who goes first, go alphabetical. Sometimes we don't have etiquette to answer every single question that we have, but if you learn some of the general rules, you can understand what your words are telling your guests, and so you can understand how to word your invitations in a way that is accurate to what they can expect at the event. So let me know what questions you have on wedding invitation wording. I hope this video was helpful as a guideline. And if you are interested in becoming an invitation designer or taking this a little bit further, stick around and watch some of our other videos and join our 7-day free invitation design crash course linked in the description of this video. Thanks, everybody.